At Starbound, we tell stories the human way. Not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's I Am Duck. Let's begin. The 11 Odyssey forward convoy ships coasted through the dark between stars, their fusion drives dormant, following the silent, immense current of their trajectory. These were arcs, their hulls, scarred by the long journey from the old sun, held the collected hopes of 60,000 souls. Pioneers, engineers, farmers, dreamers. They were a seed of humanity, cast into the fertile dark to find a new patch of sun-warmed soil. On the lead vessel's bridge, the Argo, a young girl named Iris pressed her hands against the cold plasteel observation window. She fogged a small circle on the viewport with her breath, a transient ghost against the deep expanse of space. Below and ahead, a marbled world of ochre and viridian swam into view, an orb of startling color against the black. Gehenna, the survey probes had called it, the final destination. "Is that it, Mama?" Iris whispered, her voice a tiny, reverent thing in the bridge's deep quiet. Her mother, Marin Arden, chief botanist of the expedition, knelt beside her, an arm draped over her daughter's shoulders. "That's it, my little star. Our new home." Josiah Arden watched them from the command deck of the convoy's flagship, the Persephone, a few kilometers behind the Argo. A holographic comms window showed his wife, her eyes wide, tracing the continents below. His daughter, a bouncing blur of excitement. The abstract numbers of his long-range trajectory plots resolved themselves into this singular human moment. Every calculation, every sleepless night spent correcting for solar winds and interstellar dust led to this, for them. He was about to speak, to join their moment, when his navigation console chimed, a soft, apologetic tone, a fleet-wide energy alert, massive, unfamiliar. The reading bloomed from the planet's surface, a spike of such magnitude it had to be an error, a sensor ghost. "Captain," he said to the Persephone's commander, his voice level, professional, "I'm seeing a high-energy emission from the primary. Looks like a sensor malfunction, but..." Before he could finish, a light that bleached the stars from the viewport erupted from the planet. A silent, instantaneous lance of power shot across the intervening space. It struck the Argo in absolute silence. One moment, Marin and Iris were there, their smiling faces filling the comms window. The next, the window dissolved into static. The universe folded in on itself. The lead ship, the fusion core, his family. Everything was unmade, vaporized, atomized into an expanding cloud of incandescent plasma. The severance was so clean, so total, that for a fraction of a second, Josiah's mind registered only a blank, dead channel where his family once stood. The shockwave of displaced particles followed, striking the rest of the convoy. A chorus of shrieking alarms sounded across 10 bridges simultaneously. On the flagship Persephone's view screen, the icon for the Argo vanished, a blossoming red cloud of debris blooming in its place. The light flared again. The Demeter, a bulky agricultural vessel, disintegrated. A third flare followed. The Prometheus, a science ship, followed its sisters into oblivion. The attack was systematic and silent. One vessel vanished, then the next, too fast for any warning. The remaining 8 ships, clumsy civilian transports built for endurance over agility, broke their flight path in a panicked scatter, their engines flaring in a desperate flight from the invisible weapon. Josiah Arden stood on the Persephone's bridge, his command authority transferred automatically. A standard protocol for convoy succession he himself had written. The moment the Argo's network signature vanished, his credentials authenticated on the Persephone's command grid, granting him priority access to the nearest navigation console. His ship, his world, had vanished, but his hands were steady on the holographic controls. His face remained still, his jaw set. He stared at the navigational plot, a three-dimensional rendering of vectors and velocity projections, tracking the expanding debris field and the surviving ship's relative positions. He processed variables, calculated burn vectors, and issued commands. His voice, broadcast across the convoy's emergency channel, was a calm, dispassionate instrument. All vessels, execute evasive pattern Delta 4, full burn, random headings toward the upper moon for cover, maintain broadcast and emission silence. Around him, the Persephone's bridge crew scrambled between consoles. Officers shouted status reports, their voices tight with fear. Sparks rained from a damaged ceiling conduit. The ship groaned as its inertial dampeners struggled to compensate for the violent maneuvers. Through the unfolding pandemonium, Josiah stood fixed at his console, a statue amidst the chaos. The grief was there, taking the form of a physical object inside him, a cold, dense singularity, pulling light, heat, and emotion into its core, leaving only a perfect, functional vacuum behind. His heart collapsed into a star, and his mind became the clear, cold light escaping its event horizon. Marin's smile became the arc of a planetary orbit. Iris's bright, curious eyes a distant nebula. These were just data points now, memories he filed away, unexamined. Feeling was a liability. Logic was survival. Helm, bring us behind the moon's limb. Use its gravity to slingshot us into the asteroid field. It will shield us from their fire, he ordered. His tone was as flat as a telemetry point. The helmsman, a young woman with tears streaming down her face, nodded wordlessly, her fingers keying in the new course. The massive colony ship bucked and strained, pushing its civilian-grade engines to their breaking point. On the main view screen, the marbled green planet Gehenna swung out of view, eclipsed by the grey, pockmarked face of its tidally locked moon. The debris field where 3 ships, where 15,000 people, where his family once flew, was a faint, shimmering haze against the stars. He catalogued it, tagged it in the ship's log as an astronomer might charge a new nebula. Designation, Anomaly 01. He kept his fingers steady. Soraya Vasek strode through the Persephone's engineering section. She was a woman in her late 50s, with a face forged from the same metal as the ship's bulkheads. She communicated with her hands, perpetually stained with grease and coolant, and right now they sliced the air, directing the chaos. Deck 12 has lost pressure. Seal it! Whatever's in there is secondary. Seal it now! She roared over the shriek of escaping atmosphere. I need a bypass for the primary coolant loop on engine 3, and I need it now. Venti, get me a damage report from the Hephaestus. Are their drives still online? Her world was the hiss of plasma torches, the percussive clang of mag hammers against buckle hull plates, the strained groans of a structure under extreme duress, and the ragged, panicked breathing of her crew. This was engineering distilled to its essence, a violent, desperate argument with physics, and she was winning. A young ensign, his face pale and smudged with soot, ran up to her, holding a data board. Chief Vasek, we have final reports from the other ships. Soraya kept moving, striding toward a ruptured power conduit that was showering the deck with a waterfall of sparks. Give it to me straight. The Argo, Demeter, and Prometheus are total losses. All hands, the ensign choked out. The Magellan and the Daedalus are crippled. Hull breaches across multiple decks. Drive cores are critical. They're venting everything. Soraya stopped. She turned to face the ensign, her sharp gaze pinning him in place. Over 10,000 people gone. Her best protege, a brilliant young propulsion specialist named Taro, was on the Prometheus. She had raised him, taught him all her craft. She pictured his eager, smiling face, and for a heartbeat, the mag hammer in her grip felt heavy. She shoved the grief down, compacting it into a hard, dense pellet of fury. "Evacuate them," she snapped. "Tell the Magellan and Daedalus to get every living soul they can into escape pods and work shuttles. We'll pick them up. The rest of you," she bellowed to the surrounding crew. "You heard him. We have 8 ships left, and 2 of them are about to be scrap. We will save everyone else and get back to work." She moved from one disaster to the next, barking orders, forcing her crew to act. To her, the broken systems were personal insults. An enemy had dared to break her machines, had dared to kill her people, and Soraya Vasek held a grudge like a structural weld, permanent and fused to her core. This was more than damage control. It was an inventory of wrongs. In the bruised quiet that followed, the Odyssey forward convoy's 6 surviving ships huddled together in the shadow of an asteroid field. They were damaged vessels, hiding from a hunter whose presence still prickled their senses. The emergency evacuations were complete. The living crammed into the overburdened life support systems of the Persephone, the Hephaestus, the Ariadne, the Nomad, the Icarus, and the Orion. The derelict hulls of the Magellan and the Daedalus drifted behind, their emergency lights blinking until their power reserves failed. The low hum of life support and the quiet tapping of a single console replaced the klaxons on the Persephone's bridge. Stranded, millions of light years from any Federation outpost, with damaged ships, dwindling supplies, and a predator lurking just beyond their hiding place. Josiah Arden, the convoy's acting commander, stared at the central holotank. Its projection showed the system's gravitational wells and the enemy planet's serene, marbled sphere, which belied the violence it had unleashed. "Any luck with the long-range transmission?" he asked, his voice low. The comms officer, a man whose face showed lines of exhaustion, shook his head. "The star's interference is total, sir. Even if we could get a signal out, a message to the Federation would take decades. It'd be an obituary, not a distress call." As the officer continued to scan the frequencies, a flick of something new appeared on his screen. A weak signal, structured and repeating, artificial, too elderly for background radiation, too faint for a planetary source. "Sir," the officer said, his voice sharp with interest, "I'm picking something up. A signal. It's on a tight beam, originating from within the asteroid field." Crew members lifted their heads from consoles. A few exchanged questioning glances. Another survivor, a previously unknown listening post. "Is it from the planet?" Josiah asked. "No, sir. The vector is completely different. It's close." Josiah weighed the options. Breaking radio silence was a risk. Moving one of their ships was an even greater one. The alternative was to sit here and wait for their resources to run out, or for the enemy to find them. He looked at his bridge crew. Their faces were haunted and exhausted, but their eyes were all on him. They needed a purpose beyond survival. They needed a chance. "Take the Orion," he ordered, turning to the captain of the small, relatively undamaged survey ship. "She's our fastest, smallest profile, built for silent running. Follow that signal, find out who or what is out there, but for God's sakes be careful. We've lost enough." The Orion threaded the asteroid field, its engines running at minimum power, its hull chilled to match the background temperature of the surrounding rock. For hours the crew held their breath as the ship weaved through a graveyard of spinning, silent stone. The signal led them to the heart of the field, to a small asteroid, hollowed out and absent from any of their charts. Tucked inside its protective shell sat a ship of seamless, dark metal. Its hull was a mosaic of overlapping matte black plates that absorbed the Orion's landing lights, revealing no seams. Its surface was an unbroken shell, more like the layered bark of an ancient tree than a starship. It was ancient, derelict, and alien. The boarding party, clad in heavy exosuits, entered under a gap in the hull, a wound that looked centuries old. Inside, the air was thin but breathable. From systems that were somehow running on some deep reserve of power. The corridors were organic, curving tunnels of the same overlapping material as the hull. Veins of light pulsed in the walls, brightening with proximity, as if the ship itself was aware of their passage. At the vessel center, in a vast, spherical chamber, they found the signal source, the sole survivor. It called itself Nomus. Its body, a complex fibrous structure of what looked like woven metallic threads, stood roughly 2 meters tall on 3 legs, with multiple joints. Stillness defined it, though a low, complex hum emanated from its core, a sound with texture and color. A being of vibration, a living instrument. It stood beside a small humming pedestal, the broadcast source and, as they would soon learn, its translator. As the team's leader approached, the hum from the creature deepened, and a voice, synthesized but tinged with an ancient melancholy, emanated from their suit comms. The voice was a direct broadcast, a translation of the alien's pulsing, complex frequencies and vibrations. "Greetings!" the translation came. The resonant hum from Nomus's body shifted its pitch. "You are new." The team's leader, a security officer named Riggs, kept his rifle lowered. "We're human. The planet attacked our convoy." The hum within Nomus faltered, the patterns of sound shifting to a low, somber drone. "Ah," came the sigh through the translator. "So, the Ma has called again. It has been many of your years since it last stirred. I am sorry for your loss. It is a pain my people know well. My vessel has survived by drawing minimal power from this asteroid's geothermal core. It is enough to maintain my systems and my vigil," Nomus explained. The planet, Gehenna, was a singular sentient globe-spanning organism, a hive mind of unimaginable scale and age. Nomus called it the Maw, for that was its only motivation. It perceived any complex technology and organized energy signature beyond a certain threshold as a rival, an infection in its territory. Like a body's immune system, it responded by producing an antibody, the devastating energy weapon that had annihilated their ships. "The sole response is sterilization of its domain," Nomus continued, "and it has another aspect. A low-level psychic hum that permeates the system. My archives record that in the final moments before culling, this hum can coalesce into a focused wave of terror, projected into the minds of its prey. We were the Cantori. Our seed vessel, like your own convoy, sought a new home. We were archivists, peacemakers. The Maw remained indifferent. It destroyed our ship, leaving me stranded here. I've been hiding in its shadow for a long time, watching it sleep and watching it wake." Nomus came aboard the Persephone after another aching return journey. The strange, humming being stood silently on the bridge, a creature of woven metal and sound amidst the human ship's hard angles and steel-grey functionality. The command crew gathered around him, a bereaved council. At Josiah's request, Nomus agreed to share its knowledge. It interfaced its translation device with the ship's main view screen. The screen flickered, then lit up with the archives of the Cantori, a gallery of ghosts, a museum of exterminations. Holographic images filled the bridge. First, a fleet of graceful solar sail ships like vast kites, with sails like oil on water, catching a stellar wind. Nomus provided the caption through its translator. "The Selines, explorers.
They attempted to hail the planet. The Maw responded. The image dissolved into the familiar, silent flash of annihilation. Next, a massive biological vessel, a world ship that looked like a great nautilus swimming through the dark between stars. The Pelagic Swarm. Refugees fleeing a dying star. They thought Gehenna was an unclaimed garden world. The recording showed the energy weapon systematically dissecting the vessel, piece by piece, over the course of an hour. On and on it went. A lone, fibrous probe from a species that existed only as energy. A small flotilla of rugged asteroid miners with brutish, angular ships. Explorers, refugees, pioneers. Each one arrived in this system full of hope, and each one met the same violence, silent and implacable. The archive was a testament to the planet's nature, a force of nature, like a star that burns whatever falls into it, a predator whose territory was its entire solar system. Josiah watched the litany of destruction, his expression a mask of stone. Each flash of light on the screen was a reflection of the one that had taken his family. The same shock, the same futile attempts to escape, repeated across a dozen different species, a dozen different technologies. The Maw's methods remained constant. When the last recording faded, silence filled the bridge. The only sound was the ship's environmental system's low hum. They were victims of a recurring pattern, stumbling into the hunting ground of an ancient territorial monster, one that had killed countless times before, and would undoubtedly kill again. Nomus stood silently, the vibration from its fibrous body a low, mournful tone. It had shown them the truth. Their response was now their own. The 6 remaining ship's captains gathered with Josiah and Soraya in the Persephone's briefing room. They fixed their gazes on the tabletop. "Let's summarize," Josiah began, and he clipped the words with military finality. He stood before the system's holographic display. "Our engine sustained damage. Soraya's preliminary report suggests that, at best, we could get 2 ships space-worthy enough for a long-range journey. We'd have to cannibalize the other 4. Soraya chimed in, leaning forward with her elbows on the table, her expression sour. "And that's optimistic. The failure in the Demeter's drive core sent a feedback loop through the Convoy shared power grid. Before she blew, the feedback loop fried every FTL coil we have to some degree. Fabricating new ones from scratch requires alloys we lack. We can patch, we can pray, but making it back to Federation space, the odds are infinitesimal." The Hephaestus's captain, a stout man named Gallon, rubbed his tired face. "So flight is off the table. What about settling another planet in the system? The 4th planet is technically in the habitable zone." "Unacceptable," Josiah stated flatly. "The Maw is active. As soon as we build any kind of infrastructure, a power grid, a communications network, it will register us as a threat. It will fire that weapon. We'd be living under a perpetual death sentence. Trapped. Hunted. Trapped. To run was to die a slow death in the dark. To stay was to die a swift death at the whim of the planet. Their enemy had shepherded them into a cosmic cage with sealed exits and a hungry tiger. For a long moment, the only sound was the holographic display's hum. The weight of 60,000 lives, the living and the dead, pressed down on the handful of people in this room. They had led their people to a new home, only to find a killing ground. Josiah remained in the briefing room long after the others had left. Their shoulders stooped as they filed out. He stared at the holographic star chart, his mind a storm of orbitable paths. He kept looking at Gehenna and its single, large moon. The display listed its properties: tidally locked, high iron content, Another detail, a minor astronomical curiosity, now screamed at him from the screen. A radically eccentric orbit. Its path was an elongated, imperfect ellipse. It wobbled. A gravitational pull from a system gas giant had pulled it into an unstable pattern centuries ago. It was a pendulum pulled back, held in place by a delicate cosmic balance, a wobble waiting for a push. The singularity in his chest pulsed, cold and sharp. The navigator in him saw the variables. The grieving husband and father saw a solution. An idea formed, a calculation of orbital decay, thrust vectors and gravitational collapse, a weaponization of celestial mechanics. He ran the numbers on his personal data board. He keyed coordinates and variables into the holographic interface. The equation resolved. It was possible and insane. He found Soraya in the engine room, where she had her arm buried up to the elbow in the guts of a diagnostic panel. The low hum of a ship's heart, a sound that was usually a comfort to her, surrounded her. Josiah stood in silence. He held out his data board, the screen showing the moon's orbital simulation. It started as a gentle wobble. Then, after a theoretical energy input, the wobble amplified. The orbit decayed, spiraling inward, gradually at first, then with catastrophic speed, until the moon and the planet converged in a silent, world-shattering embrace. Soraya pulled her arm from the panel, wiping viscous coolant on a rag. She took the data board and scanned the numbers. The physics of it resolved in her mind in a flash. Her brow furrowed. She stared, her face paling. The data board clattered to the deck. She looked up at Josiah, her composure broken. "Josiah," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "That's madness, not engineering." Josiah met her gaze and waited. "The calculation is sound, isn't it?" Soraya stared at him for a long moment, the engine room's hum filling the silence. His expression was one of cold finality. She bent down, picked up the data board, and looked at the simulation again. Madness, yes. A plan that was terrible, beautiful, and perfect. "The proposal is simple," Josiah said, his voice echoing slightly in the briefing room silence. He stood before the assembled captains, the holographic display behind him showing Gehenna and its wobbling moon. "We have no options for escape. Therefore we must eliminate the threat. Permanently." He called it an orbital trajectory adjustment. He spoke of gravitational nudges and kinetic energy transfer. He used the sterile language of science to describe an act of genocide. "We will use our 6 remaining ships' combined engine power," he explained, gesturing to the hologram. "We will attach our primary drives to the moon's surface. We will perform a series of calculated synchronized burns to amplify its existing orbital eccentricity. We will push it past its gravitational tipping point and engineer collision course with Gehenna." He paused. "We will drop a moon on it." The captains stared, their expressions a mixture of shock and revulsion. Captain Gallen broke the silence. "You're talking about planetary demolition? This is a civilian convoy. We are pioneers." "We are survivors," Josiah countered, his voice dropping. "And that thing down there made us soldiers. Nomus's archives proved this is an enemy beyond reason. It is a force that culls. And it will keep culling until we stop it. We have the means. We have the motive. The only question is whether we have the will." Soraya stepped forward, her arms crossed. "The task is monumental," she said. "We'll need to strip the Magellan and the Daedalus for every usable component. The burn coordination will have to be perfect to the microsecond. It will take months, 6 at least. It will take every engineer, every technician, every able-bodied person in this fleet working around the clock." She looked around the room, meeting each captain's eye. It will be the most difficult, ambitious engineering project in human history, but we can do it. The debate was brief. This was pest control on a planetary scale, a cold but necessary solution to an intractable problem. One by one, the captains gave their assent. The vote was unanimous. The Odyssey Forward Colony mission was over. The de-orbit project had just begun. The asteroid field became their silent forge, the quiet hiding place filled with the flare of plasma torches and the clang of hammers on steel. Under Sarai Vassek's command, the Convoy's remnants became a single purpose-driven machine. Her sharp, relentless voice echoed over comm channels, directing the immense undertaking. For 6 months, the survivors labored, grief set aside for the relentless work. The survivors systematically disassembled the Magellans and the Daedalus's drifting hulks. Cutting teams in pressurized exosuits swarmed over the surfaces, their plasma torches slicing through hull plates and support beams. Shuttles and cargo drones ferried the raw materials back to the Hephaestus, which converted its massive fabrication bays into a factory for the trusses that would anchor their engines to the moon. 3 months into the project, an alarm klaxoned through the Hephaestus's fabrication bay. Soraya was there in minutes, her face grim as she stared at the holographic display. Truss C, a primary engine mount, had developed a series of microscopic stress fractures during its final thermal treatment. "It's material fatigue, Chief," a haggard-looking tech reported, his voice flat with defeat. "Recasting it requires alloys we lack." "We failed." Soraya stared at the flaw in the metal, a tiny imperfection that threatened to unravel their entire plan. She scanned the schematics, her mind racing. The girders were useless, but the hull plating... "Take the aft observation deck from the Daedalus," she ordered, her voice cutting through the despair. "The section with the triple reinforced plasteel viewports. Instead of recasting the truss, we're going to laminate it. We'll slice the plate into 100-meter strips, and we'll weld them over the fractures, layer by layer. We'll turn a weakness into a strength." She looked at the tech, her gaze like a welding arc. "Whew. Get your cutting teams. Now." The clang of hammers on metal became the convoy's new heartbeat. The hiss of welding torches was its breath. They were unmaking their homes to build a weapon. They melted down sections of habitat rings, places where families had shared meals and children had played, to become the engine mounts girders. They gutted hydroponics bays for their power conduits and sacrificed every secondary system, every ounce of spare mass to the forge. The fleet consumed itself to feed its vengeance. The grim, grueling, relentless process hardened their resolve with each completed truss, with each repurposed power converter. They became architects of a cosmic reckoning. A single heavy-lift shuttle, the quarry, touched down on the moon's grey, silent surface. The dust it kicked up settled with an ethereal slowness in the weak gravity. The world below, Gehenna, hung in the black sky like a giant diseased eye, its clouds a mesmerizing and malevolent swirl of green and ochre. The crew that disembarked were miners and construction workers, their exosuits bulky and utilitarian. They carried high-powered mining lasers and seismic chargers. Their task was to inscribe. They set up the lasers on a vast, smooth plane of basalt that would, according to Josiah's calculations, be facing the planet on final approach. For 3 days they worked while the planet hung in their sky, the beams of coherent light, powerful enough to slice through asteroids, carved into the lunar rock. The only sounds were the lasers' hum and the comms' crackle, but the act itself was a monument. They etched 2 words into the moon's face, each letter kilometers high and hundreds of meters deep. A memorial for the dead, a declaration for the living, a signature on the death warrant they were about to serve. After they finished, the message stood stark and clear, a scar on the face of their celestial weapon. Anyone looking up from the planet below with a powerful enough telescope would see it. It read, Odyssey Forward. The weeks that followed saw the moon transformed. Soraya's team swarmed its surface, a small army of engineers in white and grey against the charcoal-coloured rock. Heavy lift drones lowered the massive trusses, ferried from the Hephaestus into place, and anchored them deep into the bedrock with seismic bolts that vibrated the entire moonlet. The environment was brutal and punishing. The unfiltered sunlight was blinding. The shadows were pits of black, and the fine, abrasive regolith worked its way into every joint and seal. Soraya was on the surface for most of it, her own exosuit marked with streaks of grime and crudely patched sealant. She oversaw the mounting of the 6 colossal fusion drives salvaged from the Convoy. These engines, designed for the clean vacuum of deep space, required her team to invent new containment fields, new heat baffles, and new power relays on the fly. She treated the moon as a flawed, temperamental engine she now had to redline. "She's imbalanced," she'd mutter over the comms, directing a crane to shift an engine mount weighing several tons by a few centimeters. "The core density's all wrong. We'll have to adjust the thrust vector on engine 2 by another 0.03 degrees to compensate for the mass gone over the northern pole." They worked with a focus that bordered on religious, checking every weld, every connection, performing a monumental operation on a cosmic scale. They wired a heart of plasma and fury onto a body of cold, dead stone, taming a celestial body, forcing it to bend to their will. Josiah Arden conceived the plan, but Soraya Vasek hammered it into reality. Josiah stood on the Persephone's bridge, the same spot where he had watched his world end 6 months ago. Before him, the main view screen showed the moon, now bristling with the angular, industrial shapes of human technology. It looked like a temple built by a vengeful god. "All stations, report status," he said, his voice calm. One by one, the fleet's 6 ships, now little more than mobile control centers for the engines they had given up, checked in. In a control bunker on the moon's surface, Soraya gave her final confirmation. "All drives are green. Mounts are stable. We're ready to light the candle, Commander." Josiah took a breath. This was it. The first push. In 3, 2, 1, mark. Across the dark, 6 points of light ignited on the moon's surface. Brilliant and blue-white, they salvaged drives roared to life, pouring trillions of joules of energy into the silent vacuum. On the moon's surface, the ground itself shook with a deep, resonant shudder. A web of stress fractures spread from the engine mounts. For a horrifying moment, Soraya thought the rock would shear apart, but the trusses held. Her calculations were correct. On Josiah's console, the numbers changed. The moon's orbital velocity increased by a few dozen meters per second. Its trajectory shifted. The wobble in its orbit amplified. It was a minuscule change, a cosmic whisper, but it was enough. This plan was working. Down on the planet below, something stirred. A wave of psychic energy, a low, guttural hum of confusion and alarm, pulsed through the system. The Maw, the slumbering god of Gehenna, was beginning to wake up. It sensed the change in the sky. For weeks, the burns continued on a strict schedule, each one nudging the moon further down its path of decay. And then Gehenna responded. The bridge officer at the tactical station sounded the alert. "Sir, I'm tracking multiple launches from the planet's surface. Thousands of them. Ballistic trajectories, aimed at the moon." Josiah narrowed his eyes. "Energy readings.
Readings are flat, sir, the officer replied, his brow furrowed in confusion. Primary energy buildup is absent. The big gun must have a hell of a recharge cycle. These are solid objects, biologicals. It looks like. On the main screen, the feed from a camera on the moon's surface showed the attack. Swarms of dark, ovoid projectiles, each the size of a shuttle, arced through the blackness. Their impact was a wet, fleshy thud, followed by growth. Within minutes, the impact sites were crawling with a fibrous network of swift-spreading growth, thick, pulsating tendrils. The color of bruised flesh snaked across the grey rock, reaching for the human-made engine's heat and energy. They were biological weapons, designed to smother, corrupt, and disable the foreign technology. The planet was trying to reassert control over its moon, to turn their own weapon against them. Soraya's sharp voice cut through the comms. You've got to be kidding me. It's throwing spores at us. Josiah, we have a problem. The physics problem had become a ground war. The human crews on the moon, who were engineers and technicians just hours before, now became exterminators, donning their exosuits, swarming out of the habitat bunkers, armed with the only weapons they had, their tools. They fought in near silence on a landscape of grey dust and alien flesh. Teams moved across the surface, using high-powered welding torches to sear the advancing tendrils. The alien growth recoiled from the heat, sizzling and releasing puffs of acrid vapor, but it kept coming. Other teams planted mining charges, the controlled detonations blasting craters in the rock and vaporizing sections of the biomass, only for it to creep back from the blast zone's edges. The alien growth grew into the joints of machinery, its fine fibers shorting out power systems. It covered solar arrays, starving the life support bunkers of energy. The fight came at a heavy cost. Over the weeks, they lost 14 engineers to ruptured suits, equipment malfunctions, and the alien growth's corrosive touch. The fight took on a rhythm. A scheduled engine burn would push the moon closer to its doom, and in response Gehenna would launch another wave of spores. The crews would then have a few hours to fight back the tide of alien growth before the next burn. Constantly exhausted, their suits patched and repatched, their faces grim behind their visors, they defended their monument of vengeance inch by painstaking inch. Josiah watched the fight on the main view screen from the Persephone's quiet, sterile bridge. The tiny white-suited figures battled the creeping alien biomass, the flashes of their torches like fireflies in the oppressive dark. A low, complex hum announced Nomus's presence. The Cantori had entered the bridge, the complex hum from its form shifting through a dozen different tones. Your people fight with ferocity, Nomus observed through its translator, the tone a flat, synthesized melody. You have taken this barren rock and turned it into a battlefield. Josiah kept his gaze fixated on the screen. We do what we must. This act, Nomus said, its resonant patterns shifting. This unmaking of a world. We Cantori had 1,000 years to consider such a response after the Maw destroyed our vessel. We chose to hide, to observe, to endure. We believed that to answer destruction with distraction would make us like the thing we feared. Josiah turned from the screen to look at the resonant being. He thought of Marin's smile, of Iris's hand on the viewport. He thought of the 15,000 souls turned to dust in an instant. Your people waited, Josiah said, his voice flat, betraying neither malice nor triumph. The Maw destroyed them anyway. The Maw acts without cause. Our act is a response. He turned back to the screen, to his people fighting on the moon. This act makes us survivors. The final day came, after months of labor, of fighting, of inching their weapon across a cosmic chessboard. The moon reached its critical tipping point. It had passed the point where Gehenna's gravity became the dominant force.
pulling the moon into an accelerating, inescapable death spiral. All teams prepare for final burn, Josiah's voice commanded over the convoy-wide channel. We need to adjust the trajectory for maximum impact on the northern hemisphere, where the Maw concentrates its primary biomass. On the moon, Soraya was in a command bunker, her face illuminated by a dozen status screens. Engines are redlining, Josiah. The mounts are under incredible strain. We push them any harder, and they'll tear themselves out of the bedrock. They need to hold for one more burn, Soraya, Josiah replied. Give me everything you've got. Soraya slapped her palm against a panel, overriding the final safety protocols. You heard him, she yelled to her crew. Full power. Let's give this ugly bastard one last kick in the teeth. The 6 drives ignited for the last time, burning with an output that dwarfed all the previous burns combined. The moon screamed under the strain, the entire celestial body vibrating, as if it were a tuning fork struck against the anvil of creation. The moon was now a guided missile, aimed at the heart of their enemy. The moment the burn was complete, the retrieval began. Soraya's voice, strained but clear, cut across the command channel. Josiah, I've locked the final trajectory. My team's report. We have a 90-second window to detach and clear the moon's gravity well. Any longer, and we're going down with it. Understood, Soraya. Execute. Detach, 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 Soraya screamed over the comms. All over the moon's surface, explosive bolts fired with sharp percussive cracks. The massive trusses holding the precious engines released their grip. With the moon now accelerating swiftly toward the planet, the ships had only a small window to retrieve their drives and flee. The 6 ships swooped in, propelled by emergency backups, their tractor beams locking onto their respective engine assemblies. With groans of protesting metal, the ships ripped the drives away from the falling moon, pulling them back into their docking bays. As they secured the last engine, the small fleet turned and burned, pushing away from the moon with every ounce of power they had left. Retreating to a safe distance to witness the final act, they left the moon behind, a silent grey projectile carved with their name, falling inexorably toward its destiny. From millions of kilometers away, the convoy watched on its screens. The moon, their weapon, their memorial, grew larger and larger against the marbled planet's backdrop. It fell in silence, a testament to the power of gravity. As across the final threshold, a wave of psychic agony washed over the fleet. It was a silent, agonizing scream that lanced through the minds of every human. A broadcast of terror, from a creature new to fear. The Maw knew what was coming. It understood, in its final moments, that the system it had dominated for eons would end. In a final act of self-preservation, the energy weapon on Gehenna fired. A brilliant beam of light erupted from the surface and struck the falling moon's face. The beam carved a molten new canyon across the rock, vaporizing part of the Odyssey Forward's inscription. It scarred the face of its own executioner, but its momentum remained absolute. The moon was too big, too close, too powerful. The collision was silent. One moment a planet and its moon hung in the void. The next, a flash of light so brilliant it overloaded every optical sensor in the fleet, whiting out the view screens. The impact was an event on a geological scale, the kinetic energy of a celestial body delivered in a single instantaneous blow. Though the vacuum of space carried no sound, the crews on the ships felt it, a deep subsonic vibration that resonated through their ships' hulls. The energy release was stupendous, a brief, man-made star blooming in the darkness. When the sensors came back online, they relayed a new image. The light faded, the glare receded. Where the planet, marbled green and ochre, once was, a shattered world now hung. A cataclysmic fracture spread across its surface, a network of glowing, molten canyons from which the planet's core bled fire into the dark. The impact had blasted chunks of its crust, the size of continents, into space, forming a new chaotic ring of debris around the dying world. The Odyssey Forward survivors watched in quiet from the bridges of their ships. They had faced an implacable foe, answered with implacable force, and survived. And for the first time since they had entered this system, the background psychic hum, the constant low-level thrum of the Morse consciousness had vanished. The system fell into a profound quiet. The silence was their victory trophy, a profound emptiness where a monster used to be. The great predator of this star system was extinct. The long hunt was over. Josiah Arden sat at his navigation console, the same console where this all began. The screen's soft light illuminated his face. In the main view, the shattered remains of Gehenna cooled in the void. He opened a new file, the official Convoy log, which the ship would compress and send on the long, slow journey back to the Human Federation. It was a message in a bottle, an account of their actions for a history perhaps generations away. He paused, his fingers hovering over the holographic keys. What could he say? How could he possibly explain the months of toil, the rage, the grief, the terrible and necessary act they had committed? He decided against explanation. The facts would have to suffice. He typed, log entry, Convoy Commander Josiah Arden, stardate 8843.5. The Odyssey Forward convoy has reached the Gehenna system, encountered hostile indigenous fauna, threat neutralized, proceeding with colony settlement preparations on the system's fourth planet. He looked at the words, clean, simple facts, the words of a survivor, a founder. They were the foundation stone of a new home, bought and paid for in fire. He pressed send. The message vanished from the screen, a tiny packet of information beginning its lonely journey across the stars.